Hello Red Case listeners, welcome back to our channel that discusses true crime stories that really happened around the world. We hope that you're in good health, safe, and far away from danger. In today's video, we'll journey back to one of the most chilling and disturbing criminal cases in British history. A case that would shock the nation and leave a permanent scar on the conscience of a country. This is the story of the Moors murders, a series of crimes that unfolded across the haunting, windswept landscapes of Saddleworth Moor in England during the 1960s. Behind these crimes were two names that still invoke dread: Brady and Myra Hindley, a couple whose outwardly normal lives masked something far darker. As always, viewer discretion is advised. While we aim to deliver the story respectfully and carefully, some elements may be unsettling. Let's begin. It was July 1961 in the industrial city of Manchester, England. Myra Hindley was 18 years old, working as a typist at a chemical company called Millwoods. She was known to be quiet, a bit moody, but never someone who drew much attention. That changed the moment she laid eyes on Brady, the new stock clerk who had just joined the company. Brady was intelligent, eccentric, and often kept to himself. But there was a certain charisma to him, a dark charm that intrigued Myra. She was instantly drawn to him. Over time, Myra began to change. She bleached her hair, began dressing differently, reading Nietzsche, and taking an interest in Brady's obsession with Nazi Germany and books on crime. Their bond deepened, not just romantically but psychologically. They became isolated, feeding off each other's darkest fantasies. Brady was intelligent, eccentric, and often kept to himself. But there was a certain charisma to him, a dark charm that intrigued Myra. She was instantly drawn to him. Over time, Myra began to change. She bleached her hair, began dressing differently, reading Nietzsche, and taking an interest in Brady's obsession with Nazi Germany and books on crime. Their bond deepened, not just romantically but psychologically. They became isolated, feeding off each other's darkest fantasies. As their relationship intensified, so did their behavior. Brady introduced Myra to violent novels and photographs of war crimes. To him, violence wasn't just interesting, it was a thrill. He wanted to create the perfect crime, and Myra, completely devoted to him, was willing to help. They began planning something unspeakable, something that would start a series of horrific events over the next few years. And it would all begin with a young girl named Pauline Reade. It was July 12, 1963. Pauline Reade, a 16-year-old girl from Gorton, was on her way to a dance. She never arrived. Her family was devastated. Posters went up, police investigations followed, but there were no clues. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But behind closed doors, Brady and Hindley knew exactly what had happened. That night, they had lured Pauline into their van under the pretense of looking for a lost glove on the moors. That remote, empty stretch of land would become the silent witness to their crimes, but Pauline wouldn't be the only one. Just 4 months later, in November 1963, John Kilbride, a 12-year-old boy, went missing. He had gone to the Ashton-under-Lyne market to run errands for his family and was never seen again. This time, the town reacted with urgency. Fear began to spread. 2 children missing within months, and no one could explain why. Brady and Hindley, however, were still living quiet lives. They returned to work. They smiled at neighbors. They played their roles convincingly, but their private world grew darker. They documented their crimes in chilling detail: photographs, tapes, notes, trophies of their acts, hidden away. In June 1964, the next victim was Keith Bennett, aged 12. He had left home to visit his grandmother and was never seen again. The search stretched across Manchester, but nothing turned up. No leads. No suspects. Then in December 1964 came perhaps the most heartbreaking case of all: Lesley Ann Downey, a 10-year-old girl abducted from a fun fair. This time, the horror was documented in a way that police would later find almost impossible to stomach. Her disappearance marked a turning point. Behind closed doors, Brady's depravity had escalated, and Myra's role had become more active. They weren't just killers anymore, they were partners in terror. It was October 1965 when they claimed their final known victim, Edward Evans, aged 17. But this time, things didn't go according to plan. They invited Edward to their home in Hattersley. But what Brady didn't anticipate was that Myra's brother-in-law, David Smith, would witness the crime. Smith was horrified. That night, shaken and terrified, he returned home, debated with his conscience, and eventually made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, David Smith walked into a local police station and told them what he saw. That would be the beginning of the end. Police arrived at the house. Inside, they found Edward Evans's body. The horror they uncovered would shock the entire country. As the investigation unfolded, more horrifying evidence surfaced: photographs, tapes, items linking the pair to other disappearances. Eventually, both Brady and Hindley were arrested, and the nation woke up to the horrifying truth. These weren't random kidnappings, they were calculated, methodical murders, and the victims were just children. News of the arrest of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley exploded across Manchester, and quickly, the rest of the country. The story was unthinkable: a seemingly ordinary couple living in a modest house now accused of murder. Not once, but multiple times. And the victims? Children, the press swarmed Hattersley. Neighbors were stunned. Reporters dug into the couple's background, and the more they uncovered, the darker the story became. Brady and Hindley had not only been committing horrific crimes, they had also been documenting them: photographs, audio recordings, disturbing journals. One photograph stood out, a chilling image of Hindley standing on Saddleworth Moor, staring blankly into the distance. What at first seemed like a meaningless snapshot soon became crucial evidence. Police began to suspect that the moor was more than just a backdrop, it was a graveyard. With growing suspicion that more victims were buried on Saddleworth Moor, authorities began a painstaking search. But the moor was vast, thousands of acres of open, wild land. The weather was brutal, the terrain unforgiving, but slowly, carefully, the police worked alongside geological experts, combing the ground for clues. In October 1965, they made a devastating discovery. Buried beneath a shallow grave, they found the remains of Lesley Ann Downey. She had been missing for almost a year. She was identified through her clothes and photographs. Days later, another body was uncovered: John Kilbride. His family had waited nearly 2 years for answers. Now, they had them, but not the ones they had hoped for. The public's reaction was one of collective heartbreak and fury. The trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley was set to begin in April 1966 at Chester Assizes. It would become one of the most sensational court cases in British history. As the evidence was presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavy. The prosecution detailed the horrors with precision, relying on the couple's own photographs and recorded tapes as key evidence. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence was an audio recording that investigators had recovered, the voice of Lesley Ann Downey, pleading for help, recorded in their home. The jury listened in silence. Even the most hardened reporters wept. Some jurors had to excuse themselves. It was overwhelming, chilling, real. On May 6, 1966, the jury returned with their verdict. Ian Brady was found guilty of the murders of Edward Evans, Lesley Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. Myra Hindley was found guilty of murdering Lesley Ann and Edward Evans and of being an accessory in the killing of John Kilbride. They were both sentenced to life in prison, the maximum sentence at the time, as the UK had abolished the death penalty the previous year. As they were led away, Brady showed no emotion. Hindley kept her head down, but justice, at least partial justice, had been served, or so it seemed. Though they were both behind bars, the case was far from over. In the 1980s, rumors began to swirl that there were more victims. More graves hidden on the moor. Brady and Hindley were both uncooperative, often playing mind games with authorities, releasing bits of information, then denying it. But eventually, in 1987, more than 2 decades after the original trial, police reopened the investigation. Under increased pressure, Myra Hindley finally began to confess. She admitted that there were other victims. One of them was Keith Bennett, the 12-year-old boy who had gone missing in 1964 and whose body had never been found. Keith's mother, Winnie Johnson, had spent her entire life searching for her son. And now, decades later, she finally had confirmation that he had been one of their victims. But where was he? Despite renewed searches and a full-scale excavation, Keith's body was never found. Winnie died in 2012, never knowing where her son was buried. As the years went by, many began to question, how did this happen? What twisted Ian Brady into what he became? And what made Myra Hindley follow him? Brady was diagnosed with several mental disorders, including paranoid schizophrenia and psychopathy. He claimed that murder gave him a sense of power, a statement that chilled psychiatrists and authorities alike. Hindley, meanwhile, portrayed herself as a victim of manipulation, someone brainwashed by a sadistic partner. But others saw it differently. Her role in the crimes was far from passive. She wasn't just an accessory, she was a participant. Sometimes a planner. Always present, she became one of the most reviled women in British history. Ian Brady died in May 2017, at age 79. His ashes were scattered at sea under strict supervision. No grave. No marker. No shrine. Myra Hindley died years earlier, in 2002, at age 60, after multiple failed attempts to gain parole. Each time she tried, the public response was explosive. No one wanted her to be free. Ever. To this day, the names Brady and Hindley remain synonymous with horror in the UK. Their crimes weren't just murders, they were betrayals of innocence. The face of evil hiding behind a friendly smile. A reminder that sometimes, the real monsters are the ones who look most ordinary. The Moor's murders changed the United Kingdom forever. It led to widespread reforms in how missing children cases were handled. Police strategies were reviewed. Child protection laws were improved, but for many, especially the families of the victims, the pain never faded. To this day, Keith Bennett's remains have never been found. The Moors still hold secrets, some wounds never heal, some stories must never be forgotten. Thank you for staying with us through this incredibly difficult and emotional case. If this story moved you, we encourage you to share it, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of remembrance for the victims who never got to grow up, and for the families who never gave up seeking justice. We'll see you in the next story, right here on Red Case, where we uncover the darkness so it's never repeated. Until next time, stay safe. And take care of one another. Red Case, signing off.